Welcome to this talk, which is a short tour on why burial grounds are so special. I'm Andrea and I work for Caring for God's Acre, the charity dedicated to the conservation of all burial grounds. We work towards these sites being beautiful, welcoming and connected to their communities. We are a national charity covering England and Wales, and 2020 was our 20th anniversary. We focus on the conservation of the natural, built and social heritage and support burial grounds of all types and sizes, ranging from rural church or chapel yards to green burial sites and urban cemeteries. There are over 20,000 burial grounds in England and Wales, spanning different cultures, religions and centuries. The size of each site ranges from around 1/4 of an acre for a small parish church or chapel to over 200 acres for a large cemetery. Added together, the area is similar to that of Exmoor National Park or the Isle of Wight. In the mid-19th century, cemeteries were created on the edges of towns and cities in response to increasing urban populations. These cemeteries were often designed by eminent landscape designers as gardens of remembrance with a public park in mind, hence the garden character of many. The largest cemetery in the UK is Brockwood Cemetery in Surrey, also known as the London Necropolis. It is 220 acres. The key point is that these sites are distributed in a way that means they are accessible to a significant number of the population, and each is nestled within its own distinct community. Burial grounds often contain old trees, ancient stonework and walls, flowery grassland, nooks and crannies for birds, mammals and invertebrates. It is the mosaic of features that makes them so unique and valuable. Their heritage value and even their continuing presence cannot be taken for granted. They are under threat from development, closure, undermanagement and mismanagement. A churchyard or burial ground may be the most ancient enclosed piece of land in a parish, town or city. The grassland would have been relatively undisturbed, reseeding naturally for hundreds if not thousands of years. It will have been both scythed for hay and grazed by animals during its time as a burial ground. A benefit of this management over a very long time is a rich diversity of grasses, flowers and animals. This old, unimproved grassland was once widespread in the UK, but is now rare. Since the 1940s, over 97% has vanished. Most burial grounds predate the 1940s, so are now some of the few places it remains, because they have not been artificially fertilised, treated with herbicides, or ploughed. Providing the site hasn't been neglected and that grass cuttings are raked up and removed regularly, this important flower-rich grassland persists, regardless of whether the grass is kept short, mown, or long like a meadow. For example, the photo here is of St Lawrence's in Church Stretton, Shropshire, and all they did to have this show of wildflowers that we can see to the right is simply let it grow. All the species were here just waiting to flower. We will be doing another webinar in a couple of weeks talking about the ins and outs of managing areas in a way that encourages wildflowers like this, while still being sensitive to visitors' needs. The community of plants, fungi and animals, particularly insects associated with this habitat, have taken many years to establish. Many burial grounds act as a Noah's Ark for this flower-rich habitat and are now providing seeds to help regenerate other local areas into flower-rich sites. If managed properly, these sites can continue to be hotspots for biodiversity, forming an important part of the green corridor networks for wildlife. No other type of ancient tree occurs so frequently inside church grounds as the yew tree. Britain contains one of the world's greatest collection of ancient yews, with well over half our total population being found within churchyards. Around 800 yews with an age of above 600 years have been recorded in churchyards across England and Wales. So why have churchyards become the main sanctuary for ancient yews in the UK and even in Europe. There are many different theories, and the main one is all about winning friends and influencing people. When Augustine came to bring Christianity to Britain in 597 AD, he was given the task of bringing the pagan faith to an end in a sympathetic and sensitive way. In 601, Pope Gregory suggested that places of pagan worship could simply be converted into Christian churches. So they headed to where pagans were already gathering, near yew trees, and rather than replacing the yew with a church, they simply built a church next to it. The pagans had long revered the yew tree as symbolic of life, death, and rebirth, and used their branches and foliage for ceremonial occasions. This symbology was incorporated into Christian traditions. It meant that existing yews were protected, and as Christianity ran parallel to paganism in the early stages, yews were planted in churchyards as Christianity spread. Another moment in history that helped protect churchyard yews was that when Henry IV ordered his royal boa to cut down yew or any other wood for the public service, he exempted the estates of the religious orders, so yews in churchyards avoided this spate of falling. The common yew is most widely found in churchyards, with the Irish yew planted more recently. We will just touch upon a few characteristics of the common yew. These tend to grow in a normal tree shape until about 600 years old, when they often hollow out and thicken around the base and trunk in an uneven and lumpy way. Boughs which bend or partially snap can lean onto the ground and take root. Boughs can also send down aerial roots which can root on the ground or fuse with the main trunk. This regeneration, followed by new young growth, makes a yew tree virtually immortal, and it also makes it difficult to estimate the age accurately. Experts estimate age using a variety of ways, including investigating old maps, looking up tree records, measuring tree girth, and looking at the growth form. Several yew trees are believed to be over 2,000 years old, and there is no known limit to how old they could live. Lichens have been valued by humans for centuries. In ancient Rome, lichens were used to make purple dye for togas, and in the Outer Hebrides, lichens are still used to dye wool today. As natural outcrops of rock and stone have decreased over the years, churchyards have become of supreme importance for lichen conservation. Of the 1,700 British species, over a third have been found in burial grounds, and many sites have well over 100 species on the stonework, on trees, and in the grassland. Almost half of these are rare and seldom, if ever, occur in other places. Burial grounds support many species of lichen for a variety of reasons. The different rocks and building materials can have distinctive lichen communities: limestone, sandstone, marble and mortar, etc. Also, the stonework varies from rough to smooth, shaded to exposed, damp to dry, horizontal to vertical, and all of these provide different niches for lichens. The lichens on the shaded north side of the wall, for example, are different from those on the sunny south side. Lichens often form mosaics of colour, especially on stonework. Some grow very slowly, sometimes less than half a millimetre per year. An individual lichen may be almost as old as the stone it is growing on. Country churchyards and urban cemeteries are among the best places to find a variety of fungi, particularly grassland ones. This is because these fungi thrive in old, undisturbed grassland, which hasn't been ploughed, reseeded or treated with chemicals. Waxcaps, fairy clubs, and coral fungi are amongst the colourful and interesting fungi that can flourish. Before the development of the microscope in the 18th century, fungi were a puzzle, appearing overnight and sometimes taken to be the work of dark powers. This visible part is now known to be the fruit filled with tiny spores, with the rest of the fungus below ground. Burial grounds often have a mixture of tree types, which is really valuable to birds that raise several broods in a breeding season. These birds have to start early, so may use a conifer as a nesting site for the first nest when deciduous trees are leafless, and may then switch to the deciduous trees later in the season. Many sites offer a wealth of nesting, feeding and roosting opportunities. Think of the external building walls with buttresses, gargoyles, ledges, porches, towers, spires, along with moss and ivy-covered memorials. The list goes on. Birds such as blackbirds, song thrushes and wrens use a burial site all year round, nesting in trees and hedges. Other birds, such as swifts, are here for only about 3 months, and those sites with suitable nesting places are really important for this beautiful bird which is in decline. Swifts need our help. Over the past 15 years, numbers of this amazing and beautiful bird have dropped by about 40%. Some site managers, as well as ensuring that building renovation work doesn't remove swift nesting places, are also increasing nesting opportunities by putting swift blocks behind the louvres in the church tower. Nest holes, nest boxes or swift bricks can be fitted into and onto buildings, including listed ones, without difficulty. Churches and sensibly managed burial grounds provide really important roosting sites for bats, and some have provided a safe haven from habitat loss for many generations. Bats need nursery roosts for the young, winter roosts to hibernate, and also temporary roosts to digest their food and to sleep in during the day. Old churches are attracted to bats because they have many nooks and crannies to roost in and multiple entry and exit points. Bat boxes in trees can provide extra roost sites. So now let's take a look at the memorials in burial grounds. Most people buried do not have a memorial. They became popular in the 18th and 19th century. The geology of memorials reflects where the stone came from. In the early days, only local stone was used, but once train transport began, the variety of stone types that people used increased. Memorials reflect the stories of the local people, including mortality, migration and immigration, and they also reflect the styles and fashions of the day. Often to be found on the south side of the church, churchyard crosses seem to have served a variety of functions, such as defining a sacred space for burials and being part of church rituals, including outdoor services and processions. They are occasionally used as a focal point for preaching. Whilst there are a few crosses believed to date from before the Norman conquest, most were erected after this, but before the Reformation of the Church by Henry VIII. Because churchyards didn't contain monuments to individual graves until later on, the stone crosses would have been highly visible, important structures. During the Reformation, a great many crosses were destroyed or damaged as part of the widespread removal of iconography which swept through the country. The actual cross was often removed, maybe leaving the shaft or just the base in situ. The shafts were sometimes reused by putting a sundial on top, and in later centuries new crosses were carved to replace those lost. Some crosses may have a mixture of stone masonry from across the centuries. In days gone by, churchyards were places for community activity, rather like the community hall today. There were fairs and markets, miracle plays and sacred dramas. They were places for playing games and taking oaths and settling disputes. They were places where compulsory archery practice took place, and in some sites you can find deep grooves scratched into the stonework where the local men sharpened their arrow points. Beer festivals were held, the church ales, where feasts of eating, drinking and merrymaking took place in the churchyard, organised by church wardens to raise funds. Games such as quoits, ninepins and wrestling took place, and the church wards were used to play the game of fives. Even cockfighting occurred in the shadow of the church or chapel. The north side of the churchyard, behind the church, was the place where these gatherings took place, leaving the southern side as a place for burial. In those days, people were seen as less worthy were buried on the north side. Some of the clergy were not too keen on the boisterous sports which encouraged gambling, but King James I had decreed in 1619 that traditional churchyard games were to be encouraged, providing they were held in due and convenient time and without implement or let of divine service. So the merrymaking continued. The folklore surrounding plants growing in burial grounds is fascinating. Many have religious associations. Snowdrops were known as Candlemouse boughs, February fair maids, or Our Lady's tapers. Primroses are often found in burial grounds, as they were the choice of the memorial plant for children's graves in Victorian times. The name primrose derives from the Latin primorosa, meaning first rose of the year, despite it not being a member of the rose family. In different counties of England, it is also referred to as butter rose, early rose, Easter rose, and Lent rose. Other old plant names include Keys of Heaven and St. Peter's Keys for cowslips, Angel's Eyes and God's Eyes for Germander Speedwell, Easter Bough and Sunday Whites for Greater Stitchwort, Grace of God for Meadow Cranesbill, and Jacob's Ladder and Ladder to Heaven for Solomon's Seal. And so, as we amble to the end of this talk for one of the final slides, here is an aerial view of St George's Churchyard in Leicester. This helps put in context the importance of where many sites are, nestled right in the hearts of communities, accessible for those without transport, those with mobility difficulties, and perfect for many who would like to find a peaceful space in their busy day. Burial grounds are often the only locally accessible green space for many people, and the treasures within them that we have heard about today, from the flowery grassland to the ancient memorials, are there because of the way our ancestors have looked after these sites for centuries. Now it's our time to give them the attention and care they deserve, and enjoy being custodians of these amazing places. If you would like to discover more, we have further webinars coming up and a podcast called The Beautiful Burial Ground being released next month. If you want to find a flower-rich site near you, then head to our Burial Grounds to Inspire webpage, where we are mapping sites that we would recommend visiting in the summer months. Also, if you have a well-managed site that you feel could be on this map, then do let us know. There is a week in the second week of June called Love Your Burial Ground Week that we host, and you may want to join in and run an event. Like many charities, we're a membership organisation, so from as little as £2.50 a month, you can join us and receive a welcome pack, a biannual newsletter, early invitations to events, discounts on our materials, and of course that feel-good feeling that you're helping us in the quest to ensure burial grounds are kept beautiful and connected to their communities. You may like to pop to the National Biodiversity Atlas webpage. I'll pop the address in the comments. This is where the wildlife records that people send us are displayed, so others can see what has been spotted in their local burial ground. We'll be running a webinar on wildlife recording and how to send in records soon, so I won't go into detail here, but feel free to ask questions in the chat at the end. So just before we bring this talk to a close, I'd like to say a big thank you to the players of the National Lottery, whose purchase of lottery tickets has supported us in running this series of webinars. And thank you very much for listening.